And the man who made those recordings joins us now in studio with our own Nakia Wiggum.
Our guest is Stephen Vitiello, an associate professor in VCU's Department of Kinetic Imaging. His 1999 sound recordings from the 91st floor of World Trade Center 1 were recently on exhibit with VCU Libraries. Professor Vitiello, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
So how were you able to capture sound from the 91st floor?
It wasn't easy at first, I have to say. I was given a residency in late summer through winter of 1999 and proposed that I would open my windows, put microphones outside, and always be capturing that sound and somehow processing it or listening to New York from that vantage point. And the first thing that I found out when I got up there was that the windows don't open. And they'd given me the residency based on that proposal, but I couldn't actually do it. And asked all sorts of friends and listened for ways to hear through the walls, tried lasers, but there was nowhere to bounce out the window off of because we were so high, and eventually learned about contact microphones, which are these little piezo discs which work kind of like a stethoscope, and you attach it to the surface in the way that, with a stethoscope you can't hear a heartbeat until you put it on the body. With these microphones I couldn't hear anything until I found the right place on the windows, and then through my mixing board was able to amplify the sound. And suddenly the very first sound I ever heard was church bells. Then I heard airplanes, car crashes, boats, and just New York came to life, but all through the building.
Can you tell us the importance of your recordings?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, for me, that residency kind of was my transition from being a musician to a sound artist. And so from my own work, it really taught me a lot about site-specific listening and experiencing architecture, open-ended listening rather than just musical, sort of linear listening. Historically, everything changed when the buildings were destroyed, and I thought at the time maybe I should just put those sounds away, and what a lot of people said to me was that it was a way to experience the buildings that will never happen again, and a way to be sort of rooted in the memory of the buildings in a very special way of hearing that very few people had access to.
Okay. Can you tell us what was going through your mind on 9/11?
It's funny, I remember I was living about 14 blocks north, right along the water, so really, within eye view, and my mother called and said, something's happening, and I was like, oh, you're being nuts. Then I turned on the news and went, holy cow. And still didn't totally believe it. And I went down with my daughter, who was 4 months old at the time, and my wife, and saw the pillars of smoke and saw people running. And it was scary, but it almost felt unreal. And so we then spent 2-3 days, like the rest of the world, watching it on television, even though it was right outside, and slowly processing the loss, the fact that New York would never be the same, and that people I knew may have been lost, or certainly everybody I knew somebody. But it took a long time to really understand how severe it was. It felt almost like this frightening theater at the time.
Can you describe some of the sounds that you heard, like from you being like a sound artist?
I remember so many of the sounds I heard when I was in residence in '99. In terms of the sounds in 2001, when the buildings were destroyed, there's the emergency vehicles, but there's also this really intense feeling of quiet. I remember the smell of the buildings burning, which is a sad thing to say, more than I remember the sound. I remember people even running, but seeming to be this hushed tone. And in a sense, everybody was almost making room in case something happened. So I more remember silence, even if that's my memory of it. But the sounds when I was in residence were chaotic. You could hear the building moving, creaking, cracking, airplanes, helicopters. As I said, the first thing I ever heard were church bells, and the wind would roar and sometimes sweetly almost sing like an orchestra tuning up.
Okay. What do you hope people take away from your sound recordings?
Well, in the first thing, in terms of these recordings of the World Trade Center, there's this, maybe a kind of intimacy of experiencing that building, imagining life in that building, but also just the vulnerability. I mean, in the recordings that were on exhibition at VCU's libraries, you could hear the moving of the building, the creaking, the cracking, and you really sense the vulnerability. So it's not that I want people to take fear, but just an experience of the physicality of listening, and maybe an appreciation of how much more there is to hear if you really pay attention.
We've been speaking with Stephen Vitiello, an associate professor in VCU's Department of Kinetic Imaging. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure.